Welcome everyone to Hunt the Habitat. A great dog and a shotgun will only get you so far in the uplands. In this podcast, Ann Jandernaw helps us to attain a more in-depth understanding of the birds we love to hunt, their habits, their habitat, and how those change through the year and through the hunting season. Hunt the habitat, find the birds.
Typically at this point, you would be hearing Steve doing the introduction, asking what's new in the North Woods and how I'm doing and all that other stuff. But it's a little bit different this time. For many months, Steve and I have been talking about when is he going to come up here. And my schedule is such that it's nuts half the time and trying to find an opening. And of course, then you go through the fall and all of a sudden we found an opening and things worked out and the weather cooperated and so forth. In other words, the frickin' stars aligned. But what was interesting is that I think of all the podcasts we've done, this one's pretty in-depth. And I hope we were able to get it recorded right, because we tried for a first time trying to record why we were looking at habitat, basically going to different areas and driving to those places and recording the podcast in between. So I know there's going to be tweaks and things that we need to do with the podcast, but I looked at this and I said, well, I'd love to have it better, but boy, there's a lot of information on this podcast, and I don't know if we'll ever be able to reduplicate it the way it's presented right now, because you can talk about things, but you're leaving out little things. And for me, doing podcasts can sometimes be stressful. So the more relaxed I am, the better I can bring out the information. But what was really interesting was I didn't realize, and maybe that's part of doing a description for people, like, for instance, slope. He was thinking slope was more like a small hill. And I'm doing slope is more, it's nuances in the cover. So you're going to hear about that. You're going to hear how I work a running bird, because we used his dog and we watched her. She did a nice job. She relocated and everything multiple times. And what's interesting is that learning how far to get ahead of the bird and breaking that down. Now that was a really interesting aspect. And in this, we're going to talk about the distance between when a bird pauses and then it runs and then it holds up again because it's like, oh, I don't think they're coming. I think I'm finally safe. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, they're coming. I got to move on again. So with that being said, there's measurements, and I talk about the measurements in this. So I went back, which we couldn't do when we were doing the drive with the podcast and all that. I went back and those measurements were running anywhere from 55 to 62 yards. Did anywhere from 4 to probably 5 total. But, when I look at the distances, and that was what the distance that when the bird got pressure, it moved out X number of feet, say 55 yards, stopped again, thinking, okay, I'm safe. And then it moved out again and did this again, and it gradually started to get a little bit more distance. So part of what I was trying to show them is how I stop a bird from running and how we block it and then create an opportunity for a shot, because I had to do that with my clients. So we'll go into this in the podcast, but I realized during the podcast, I say, you need to know your measurements. Well, I figured, okay, I'll give you the measurements on the front end, and then we'll talk about it during the podcast, because we were out in the truck, and I typically would be sitting down and looking at maps and imagery and measuring things out. I hope you enjoy this. I think we honestly can do better on the podcast itself for noise reductions, but this is our first try, so give us a little slack there, and we'll work on the other part. But in the end, I hope you get the information that you're looking for, and if you have questions, and I always tell you guys this, just drop me an email. I'll be glad to answer them. And if for some reason I don't get it done, you just say, Ann, I sent you something. No problem. Plate's full, and sometimes things roll off the plate. So On that note, I'm going to jump right in and we'll go right to what we recorded. I hope you guys have a great day and hunt the habitat.
So, continuing the conversation we had a second ago, I think sometimes there's confusion about when we have to transition to mixed hardwoods or potentially a much older aspen cut. What should that look like in order to make it worth hunting? We're in a position right now where we need to be transitioning into different cover. So, again, my question is, what does that look like?
Well, I think part of it is that your dog's going to tell you a lot what it was going to look like by how it reacts. It can't be all grass on the ground. It can't be all open and just a few shrubs. Typically, it's going to need enough shrub component to form connective areas that they can escape from pressure, enough that they can feed if it's a shrub that provides food. Because if the canopy gets too big, you lose your shrub component. Because shrubs still need to get sunlight versus an area that's totally dense canopy. Because when you have dense canopy, you don't have shrubs. You have a very slight understory. So it's going to be something that is, I would say, 25 years or less in there. Now, you can do thinnings and end up with some shrub component here and there in patches. But when you have an overstory that can support avian predators perching up there and waiting for something to move, that doesn't always work either. So, in general, a lot of it is your dog. A lot of it is, if it's so dense, you can't get through it. Now, that's nice for a bird. So, but can you get around it is the next question. Can you block? Is it a type of habitat that you need to have two people hunting and one blocking? And if you have to, in those type of situations, go tap your dog, you're in trouble because you're not going to be able to get in there to tap the dog on the head to release it.
Right.
Your dog needs to be able to release on command. And typically the tap on the head and all that's for field trial. Grouse hunting, there's probably more commands than people realize in grouse hunting because in the end, you need to be able to adjust the speed of the dog, the stalk of the dog, and the dog also needs to respect the fact that you're going to go out in front of it and come around. So,
but they're subtle commands.
Yeah. But still, they're commands. So, but it's their commands anyways that aren't being put in. I mean, that's not a field trial command.
No, absolutely not.
So my point is that if someone, which a lot of people think that if you buy a field trial dog, it'll make a great grouse dog. And unfortunately, sometimes those are the first dogs they buy. So what are they getting?
A lot of horsepower.
A lot of horsepower, and it's like a runaway freight train. So my point is that grouse hunting is subtle. It's not a freight train in the woods, at least as far as I'm concerned. And it's basically, as I've said before, it's like playing chess in the woods, being able to shift and the dogs shift with you. I mean, think about it this way. Animals don't run like a freight train through the woods. If they did, they wouldn't survive because they can't stalk their prey.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, a lot of grouse hunting is stalking. And the less birds you have, the better you better be at stalking. In certain times of the year, you can get away with the freight train and noise and everything like that.
Certainly.
But as the season continues on, there's some finesse that needs to come into the actual hunting with birds. And there's a chess game mentality that takes place that you need to look at as well.
Well, and the chess game is just fun. It's... we all dream of the dog that runs past scent and stops and just nails it. Okay, but really the fun part of the game is stalking with the dog, being way off to the side, hooking around, trying to plan your approach to the point. You helped me with some subtleties on that yesterday we can talk about later, but...
Well, let's talk about them right now.
Yeah, we certainly can. Yeah, and so Ann and I got to walk her property a little bit, and no firearms with us, nothing like that, but let my dog stretch its legs. When I came up and visited her, it's about a 5.5-hour trip from my house to hers. So we took my dog out in the woods, and we were fortunate that she did a nice job on a grouse.
But the key best part is that I think what you were shocked at was how many relocatings we did.
Yes.
And a lot of dogs won't, seasoned dog will put up with that, but young dogs have trouble learning that.
Yes.
Because they're never taught that the scent's going to be taken away from you multiple times.
Right.
And the distance of the run. So it was very easy to see where it started, what was in between, and the multiple stops. And then in the end, getting out in front of that bird.
Right. It wasn't the classic, as many of us do, look at a point 20 yards in front of the dog and come in at a 45 degree. It was, Ann had me do a big hook around.
And that's what I've been talking about, the J hook.
Right, exactly. Went way around, came in, and I found myself in a position where the grouse was between me and the dog.
And what was the other key?
Finding an open spot.
Can you see ahead? Because I pretty much knew where I figured that bird was going to go.
Okay.
But the thing is, was it open so you could shoot?
Yes. And I would have had a beautiful shot. Now, whether I'd have hit it or not, it's my problem.
Taking away the options that the bird had to escape, then forcing the situation so the bird flushes where you obviously want. And that's why I stepped in where I did. Because, okay, we had one whole side flanked. The dog's at the back door. I'm almost opposite of where the bird was. I was sort of trying to gauge this and look at her and then gauge it. And then Steve was down farther. And so it was either going to, there's a little bit of a gap between Steve and I, but there was a huge open gap to the east. And the bird's not going to fly back toward the dog. It doesn't want to go toward me. But knew Steve was there because you make noise when you come up and around, and then you talk just a little bit. But so the bird knew where all the players were, and there wasn't many options left. And that's what you're doing, is you're taking away options for the poor bird.
Well, the bird lived to fly another day. After that exchange, Ann, you made an interesting comment about the use of noise. We talk about stalking and we talk about trying to be quiet sometimes, but I guess this makes a lot of sense, but it's not something I'd ever really thought of.
At that point, I want noise to form an imaginary boundary for that bird. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And it does now, particularly. You're using the noise. So, for instance, when I did that big hook around, so Ann literally had me go back out on a little 2-track, walk down a little bit, come back in, and later on,
there was a trail that crossed in front of them.
Little bit. But later on, she said, the noise you made helped to get the bird to sit.
And then I walked in, and the bird's like, shoot, this is too much. I can't handle it. And
time to get out.
Yeah. And I asked, could you have shot the way it unraveled?
Absolutely. It would have been a great shot. It really would. I mean, I joke about my own shooting, but it would have been as easy as a grouse shot gets.
Right.
A little bit of a crosser, but I was set up perfectly. So
that's what you learn, these things from guiding, is how it happens, for me at least, is that I learned what did my clients need in order to have opportunities. And that's how you create an opportunity. It's a lot harder when you're by yourself than it is if you've got an extra person there. You could see if you even you got the guide and you got two guys, you could see how you could have flanked it.
Oh, gosh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, getting back to the topic of using noise, that presupposes that I hooked around far enough to get out in front of the bird, though.
Well, I would have hollered back at you to not go any farther.
Okay.
You gotta leave an opening.
Right.
If you don't leave an opening, then it'll come at you, or it'll try to run in between you.
Mm-hmm.
You got to provide an opening, and yeah, it's putting a lot of thought into this, but you have to have it where the bird is like, okay, I hear stuff over here, but I don't hear anything over there. That's my option.
Okay.
So getting people into position is key. And part of it is you're reading cover. Now, I have the benefit in that situation, and it's my backyard, basically. But when you're guiding, you may have familiar knowledge of an area because you've been in it before, but other times you're reading that cover on the fly, especially if it's the first time you go in there.
Absolutely.
And you got your clients and you're stacking them up and basically saying, okay, you're here, move ahead. And so many times people don't move ahead far enough. Because the one thing, if you think back about where she first pointed, and each time was getting longer and longer, the distance that bird was moving.
She worked that bird for a while.
But each, from scent to scent, was getting farther apart. The bird was running farther. And that's another thing is, and I've talked about this, get an imaginary distance between the scent. And when I say that, that's where it's built up, where the bird pauses. But that bird held because of you going out and around.
Now, let's say I was alone. Let's say I did go out and around. Let's say I did successfully.
And then
and that was my question. Now you walk in towards the dog.
The dog. Or if you have the command where I train my pointers to be both pointers and flushers.
Mm-hmm.
So that they learn to take just a few more steps, stop, a few more steps and stop.
Okay.
To the point that then the bird's like, oh shoot, they're coming. But the hard part is then, most of the time, you don't have the opportunities to swing when you need to, versus if you're waiting for someone to walk in or a dog. Because what I would do is when I'd have the clients set up where I want them, I was always back by the dog, and then I would release the dog. And you can see there where I'd have my release command, bird would flush, I'd tell them settle, and then there was no chasing going on. Because you could have multiple birds, but I mean, it's easy when you're right behind the dog controlling that part of it. And there's so much happening all at once, and usually there's just guns going off, multiple shots and everything, and did you hit it? No, I missed it.
That's usually the case.
Yeah, whatever, but it's one of those things, it's really interesting to set these things up, and that to me was probably for guiding.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't the bird flying. It was setting things up so I could control the situation. And that's, people look at you and they're like, right. But there's an art to it and it can be done.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so much of it is understanding your dog's body language. When the dog's tracking, even if it's tracking slowly, or when the dog's just tight as a drum and look, there's a bird here.
Well, it's not only body language, there's a lot more coming in there. It's where is the bird going to hold up? Mm-hmm. How far do you need to go out? When do you come in? What options are you having? You're looking ahead to find, like I showed you, those lines in the woods, and try to work those things. And what they are is just natural lines in the woods to work through. Some people might call them like a deer trail or something of that nature, but there's other openings that you can just sort of like little small corridors. So it's multiple things happening, but it's just But you got the dog, so that's actually, to me, is the easy part. It's, for most people, it's navigating all the cover and where to go and how far to go. Most people don't go out far enough. They stay too close to the dog. We're not hunting quail.
Mm-hmm.
We're not hunting other birds that hold like a woodcock. You're hunting a bird that wants to run, and you need to know the distances between every time that dog goes on point and then has to relocate again. Each distance, if it's starting to increase, the next one will be longer, the next one will be longer. So that tells you that you got to keep moving a little bit farther ahead.
Okay. And this gets back to something you talked about in the past. You kind of want to be on the downhill side of the dog, wherever possible. All things being equal. I understand if you're alone, sometimes you got to make some hard decisions.
If you're going to go out and hook around,
Mm-hmm.
you're barely on the downhill side. If you're coming back in at that dog.
Okay.
And you got to know, you got to be able to see where the dog's looking.
True.
Because if you don't, you're going to overshoot it.
I'll lose sight of the dog.
Well, what it'll end up doing is the bird will go up above you.
Okay.
Yeah, because you got to follow that line there and be able to see where the dog is looking, but also realizing that if she's holding the point or he's holding the point and not moving at all, and just like frozen rock solid, the bird's probably not very far, especially if you've done this 3 or 4 times. But if the bird is moving, she's going to relax. She's going to get fussy, he or whatever, because he wants to reacquire the scent. So it depends on where the dog is. If you overshoot it too far out, if you undershoot it, then the dog's going to try to go out around you to get ahead of you again. It's just a lot of that's reading the cover saying, where does that bird want to hold up?
And this brings up another point that you made, in that you may have to do this multiple times on a given bird. You may have to do this J-hook 3-4 times.
Yes and no.
Yes and no?
Yeah, we saved the J-hook for the last part where the dog is really,
Right.
really intense.
Right.
Your dog wasn't intense enough in the beginning
Correct.
because she was flagging.
Yes, she was. Yeah. No, that we knew the bird was there on the last point.
Yeah, there was no question
on that one. But it's possible that by the time you make your J-hook, bird may have run.
You saw me run.
Yes.
Right. You saw me the second time to the last. I ran to get ahead because I knew what was going on.
Okay.
And the next time I had you moving to get farther ahead.
Right.
And it's important because if you don't, you've just given the whole thing away. You've wasted all that work of basically finding the bird and then relocating the bird. But that's where I get back to it. You've got to know your measurements or close to it, how far that bird's moving each time. And is it getting longer? Because if you don't, you're guessing. If I measured that out, I bet you'd be surprised how each time it just kept accelerating. The distance kept accelerating. And this is a very pressured bird. But the only thing that stopped it from running more and more was us flanking at the end. But she did not want to move. So that tells you her scent. That tells you that she had the scent so strong that she was not going to move.
She wasn't.
She did a beautiful job, and everyone was in play where they should be. So it's one of those things that you have to, in the beginning, you've got to get close enough to the bird. But if you're by yourself, yeah, you probably will J-hook some. But wait till the dog stops flagging.
Right.
Because you're not close enough then.
True. Okay. So let's put a finer point on this when you talk about distance. Your dog has relocated maybe several times.
Mhm.
All right. And the distance is going out. Okay, bird's moving more. Okay. Is it that point-to-point distance that tells you how far out to hook around?
A little bit, yeah. You're gauging it, but you're also looking for the breaks.
Okay.
You're looking for the breaks in the cover. What's going to make that bird move?
Okay.
Because if you come to a break where it's open again, like if that bird had come to where that little trail was where you ended up at,
Right.
it's going to flush.
Okay.
And if that bird had, which I was surprised the bird didn't flush through that low spot, because it was open, it could have easily launched, but it thought it just didn't want to.
Mm-hmm.
But if it had met a trail,
Mm-hmm.
it would have gone.
Okay. Well, let's put a distance on it. All right. Let's say it's been 20, 25 yards between points. All right. Is that telling you now I want to get out 40 yards in front? I know I'm trying to pin you down a little bit. I know that's not fair, but
It's hard to do that.
yes, it is.
You saw what I did.
Mm-hmm.
How far I had you go ahead. So that was probably the best example I could give you. And it was, she had 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 relocates, maybe 5.
Mm-hmm.
The original sent the first time way back in.
Right.
So, I
Yeah.
mean, these are all places I knew the birds hung out at. But it's, you're not going to get some specific answer out of this from me at least. Because I'm reading cover.
Right.
I'm reading dog.
Okay.
I'm reading options.
Okay.
That's what you guys have to do. You've got to look at your options, and in time you will learn what you need to do. But the biggest fault I see is people do not go far enough out. Especially when the first time, yeah, it's going to be close. If that dog's staunch and everything, that bird's going to be really close. But how staunch is the dog? And when she got to that last one, that bird wasn't moving anymore because you were where you were at.
Right.
So we stopped the run. And that's what's important, right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see a need for you to go any farther than that trail.
Right.
And I knew the trail was there. Because the trail, if she or the bird, I should say, I'm fine.
Mm-hmm.
But the bird would have hit that and would have flushed right then. Because it's open. Breaks in the cover are the opportunities for a bird to fly away.
Which raises something else we talked about. And that is subtlety in topography and subtlety in, so when you talk about an opening, all right, one of the things that struck me is that when Ann talks about an opening, she's talking about small little breaks in cover. She's not talking about a large open area in the cut, okay? She's talking about could be a 3-4 foot wide path. It's not anything large. We're talking really subtle things here. And it's the same with what you taught me it's the same with topography in terms of slopes, hills. So Ann made a comment about a section of a cut with an east-facing slope, which means the sun's going to hit it first, the dew's going to dry off on it first. And I'm looking at this, and it's not like it was a hill.
It was very gradual.
It was a mild slope. And I had always thought in terms of, well, we need a little bit of a hillside here. That's not what we're talking about.
Not always. I mean,
It can.
down south, yeah, or out in Maine or the North New England states, but for the most part, these are typically gradual around the Midwest. But it's picking up that area and being able to see what the transition is. because you also had a transition in cover too.
Mm-hmm.
And it's seeing that transition in cover from one to the next. I mean, you've got hardwoods and you've got aspen, but in between it, you've got a hardwoods aspen mix. And then, so you go from the hardwood to the hardwood aspen mix to the aspen lowland mix to the lowland, to maybe tag holders to lowland conifer mix and so forth. So it's seeing the breaks, because your breaks are also telling you many times there's your elevation change.
Mm-hmm.
It's a change in cover. So that's how I would look at it.
Right. But these aren't huge changes.
No, I mean, everything in nature is subtle. It's not dramatic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people make it dramatic by putting a trail here or a trail there. But it's picking out the little nuances of the habitat that's around you. It's the little clusters of pines here and how they maybe line up with other clusters of pines and what's the thickness of the cover from one to the next. All of these are, I think the easiest way was to show someone, to actually have a bird or something fly.
One of the fun things that we did, I wrote down, was when you see a grouse flush on the side of the road, stop and look and try to figure out why that bird was there. And so I'm going to be quiet in a minute and just let Ann talk about this, but we were driving down the road and it was pretty open on both sides.
It was hardwoods. It was high, elevated too.
And it wasn't dense hardwoods at all. Okay, it was scattered hardwoods and some low cover, and we saw a grouse on the left side of the road and went, what is he doing here? And Ann, I'll let you tell the rest of the story because it's kind of fun.
So first thing I do is, what is he doing here? And I pull over, stop to get out to go see it, and then I go, I know why he's here. And about that time, two more get up. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. It made me want to go way down in there and see where they were coming from. But I imagine there was in considering the fact that it was a hardwoods that was harvested maybe 15 years ago, I have suspicion that down by the bottom edge of it on the back side, there's a nice thick mix of cover that these birds like, and that's where they came from. And there's probably hazelbrush down there, I bet. So, I mean, it's all things I'm thinking about in my head. But sure enough, there was the ironwood and the ironwood catkins. And they had come up to enjoy that for supper.
And there were these two lone ironwood trees.
There was more than two.
Was there more than two?
Yeah.
Okay, I just saw the two.
No.
But they were there right on the edge of the road. But if we hadn't stopped and tried to figure out why those birds were there and just taken a look at what was on either side of the road.
Well, that's what they come up a lot of times into the hardwoods for, those catkins. I don't know why they like them over a lot of other things, but they do love ironwood. But yeah, it was cool seeing that.
That was fun. And Ann got out of the truck, walked over, looked around, looked straight up, and went, aha!
Yeah. Hopefully you can figure out something about these birds. In some ways, they are a little mystical. Because they are not just, let's do this and let's do that and I'm good type of thing. These guys are sort of like, they just, you almost feel like they're changing their mind on the fly. It sort of sounds like what I do. Not that I'd ever change my mind 100 times in a day.
Probably the one thing, though, that we talked about the most, and again, it's intuitive, but I don't know that we think about it enough. When we're looking at cover, and we're looking particularly at your maps, we're not just looking at the cut we're not even just looking at what's around the cut. We're looking at intersections of cover, aren't we?
Right. And we had that one bird flush right away, and that showing you the distance of what the bird was flushing to was also a big deal. So we had a bird flush, and I knew about where the bird, what his range was, because it's a male in that area. And there's times I find him in one area and then he flushes back down. And I find him again up in that area and he flushes back down. And he always does the same route. So you get to know which ones are doing what. And what do we have, 450 feet, roughly?
Yeah.
You know, give or take, because we did a measurement. And so, and it wasn't a super ballistic flush, because I think it would have been more ballistic if he had flushed from the upper side. But it was definitely, I'm headed for cover. And that's what the bird did. Ton of agenda. We're out here and they're fixing the road. And they've got a grader and they got dump trucks and they've been in the gravel pit and they're rebuilding the road. This thing's going to be soup next week when they get 6 to 8 inches of snow. Do not want to come on this road next week.
Unless somebody pounds it down pretty hard.
It's going to take quite a bit. They haven't done this for quite a few years either. That's a lot of back and forth.
Yeah. Well, anywhere there's a puddle, they've dropped this stuff.
Well, they missed that one.
No, he's going to grade it over later.
Oh, I know he is. Right now it's a mess. What were we talking about anyways?
We're talking about intersections of cover.
Intersections of cover, yeah. And that's really important mid to late season. It becomes extremely important. Because traveling corridors more than anything. I'm not looking for them out in the middle of the cut. I'm looking for them what's along the edge of the cut. And basically, what options do they have? And that's the key word, is options. Not options for us, options for them. Because if they don't have the right options, they're not going to be there. They'll either be gone or they'll be someone else's lunch. And instinct has shown them that I have to have options to escape. I need options for food. That's why the male habitat is so diverse. It's got to have everything in it to support him year-round. And typically, they're never really too far from a cut, some type or some even age or dense, gnarly stuff that they can dive into or whatever, or hide or not be seen. But for the most part, you look at a map and you might be saying, okay, here's a cut here and there's an older cut here. And you think that's good enough. That's not good enough. It's basically, you need to know the age of the cuts. Multiple older cuts are fine. That's great. But then you also need to know, okay, classify your lowlands, your tag alders, but especially late season, your lowland conifers. Tamarac's okay, but it doesn't have the density that black spruce does. And that's cedar swamp right there.
Mm-hmm.
So you got the black spruce and the cedar. Cedar sometimes gives you too much openness underneath it. It can work, but you can get a browse line in there from the deer browsing it, which then gives you, like a predator, a lot of view to look underneath it.
Okay.
But it also will work, because typically the farther into a cedar swamp you go, the deeper it is. But the other thing, too, about cedar swamps and some of the black and spruce areas is like the root systems, they can get underneath them in holes.
Mm-hmm.
So,
but what you were showing me on the map was specific places where
3 to 4 to 5 things come.
Exactly, yeah. 3, 4, 5 types of cover come together or are very close at hand. You showed me one where you had some hardwoods nearby. You had an old cut, an aged out cut. You had a prime cut, and you had tag alders, all within a relatively small area.
So that goes back to the measurements. You can go ahead and you can measure your distances and find your corridors, which it's interesting what opportunities you can see that could be created for these birds. You've got to have your dense areas, you got to have your open areas, you've got to have opportunities for birds to fly from one side to the other or whatever, feeding. And then, because a lot of times, most of the time they don't fly unless it's get away or go up in a tree to bud. But most of the time they walk to where they're going to feed, because in the wintertime they got to conserve energy. So more flying you do around, the more energy you burn and the more fat you burn, which we all know they don't have a lot of fat. So think about, okay, the bird needs to walk to it, but then you might sail down. You dive off of a tree and just sail back down. Or if he's in the hazel brush, he's putzing around in there, and then he's got plenty of overstory coverage for him. And a lot of hazel brush will connect to something else, and then to pines, and sometimes you'll get to go under those pines and then run the length of the pines and then jump to the next thing. They don't want to be in all...
Getting pretty close to deer season here.
Mm-hmm.
I think Minnesota's deer season may have already started. I'm not sure about that. By the time we publish this, probably will have started. Wisconsin's is a little over a week away. Once we get out of that, let's just call it first week of December.
Muzzleloader.
Muzzleloader will be going on, but we're still going to be out there. We're still going to be chasing birds. But how should our strategies be changing as we look at that early December time period?
Well, it's based on winds and based on snow or lack of snow.
Mm-hmm.
If there's no snow and no changes in the winds, it's basically the same pattern. If you have winds, go down, go into quiet areas, go to where you don't feel the wind on your face and you don't hear it. That's the key. But when I talk about wind, I'm talking about 12 miles an hour on up. It does the birds good for a while to have things quiet, because then they won't be as jumpy. But then also, they're going to be moving, and they already have been moving into pockets already. They did that early, I think, this year.
Mm-hmm.
But with that being said, if you have a bunch of snow, then the conifers become more important. And then the closeness of the food source becomes more important. So in all that, you need to have it where these birds can quickly access food. So they'll be closer to hazelbrush patches, closer to some male aspen buds, or whatever the opportunity they have to eat. And with snow, they're going to start going to the tops to eat out of the tops of the trees. Buds. A lot of the Caskins hazelbrush patch, they might try that, but really it's what they have opportunity to eat is the key.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm speculating. It's all depending on what's in their world. And that's your responsibility to define it. Get a flush. Take time to know what's around it. Why was the bird there? Because that's the only way you're going to start connecting dots. It's like when we saw that one bird there and it's like, okay, why are you here? And I wanted an answer. And I got my answer. And there was more. There were more birds there. And then where they flushed to was like, you just gave your secret away. And so that was the other part of it there, which I could easily go back in there and go down back behind the hill and probably get in birds that no one's messing with. Because it's not what you would have expected. And there's always some birds that hang out in that mixed hardwoods with lowland, but it depends on the age of the mixed hardwoods. And it's hard to define that it's exactly what age it should be. Because it'll vary on slope, it'll vary on, there's a little plateau down there before it drops into the golden conifers and such.
Mm-hmm.
Is there enough food even there? Or is this just a fluke that those birds found that spot? A lot of things to it. Grouse are not a simple subject, they're a complex subject.
And they can eat so many different things.
Well, like a big smorgasbord.
Yes. Yeah, and they're part of the smorgasbord on everything else.
Right.
What have we missed here?
I don't know. We've been driving back roads, so if you're hearing a rumbling in the background, it's because I'm driving back roads and looking at cover.
We have seen a lot of great cover here. But again, one of the things you kind of pounded into me a little bit, but there's cover.
And then there's real cover.
And then there's cover with good shrub component.
And options.
Yes. I mean, we drove by one prime age cut, and I think it's the type of cut a lot of guys would dive into. And you looked at it and you said, no, too thin. There's no shrub component there. There's not enough there, which was interesting. You need to see those tangles.
You don't want to see them walking around in there. You certainly don't want your dog to see them walking around.
Oh, no.
You need to have a little bit of areas where if they stop, they just sort of blend in with their cryptic colors. And it's like, okay, I know there's something in here, but for the life of me, I can't see it. I think that's why these birds go and they stop and they stretch their neck out so they're looking like some tree branch. Or I just sprouted.
It was sure fun watching your puppy yesterday.
Really?
Yes.
Well, he hasn't had much opportunity, the poor guy.
Mm-hmm.
I was busy dealing with everyone else's pup. And this pup was a single pup called Bo Jr. And he's no pressure there. He's doing his thing. And you could tell when he got sent.
Absolutely.
He was cautious. I can't teach cautiousness.
And you could see...
It's like when he's thinking, too.
When we were out, after we had been out a little while, you could see he was getting more comfortable and he was starting to push the boundaries a little bit on distance, on range a little bit. I mean, he never got very far away, but he got a little further away the longer we were out.
Yeah.
It's kind of neat. You could just see.
And it's the way I like to run dogs. I don't like to have to say much.
You didn't.
Hardly say anything.
No. You whistled a couple times. Just that was really it.
Yeah, and you and I just talked.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly. Did his stuff.
Yeah.
You could see when he didn't get sent, he hung a little bit by the trail, and then as soon as he got sent, he was searching for it. And it was fun, because he was getting sent in places I figured he should get sent. And that's what's nice is that, well, basically, Steve got to see what I've been talking about for quite a while, just how I go out my back door and I've got everything I need, which I'm thankful for.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's an amazing situation you have here. You can see why your dogs develop so early.
That's all they know, really. But it's fun. I mean, it's a lot of fun. All my training's set up based on guiding to create the scenarios that I ran into when I was guiding. And basically, I separated the elevations with trails. I set the property up for training for everything that I could think of, junctions after junctions, and wide trail and then narrow trails, and then trails down between the transitions, between the habitat, and the ability to, if I flush the bird from here, I know it's going to settle over here, so I go out and come back around and J-hook back, bring in the scent different for the pup. It's a lot of fun. It is not the same thing over and over, that's for sure. Pups get bored at that.
One of the great things for me this year has been just watching my dogs progress. This is the first fall since I've retired that I've really been able to devote the time to bird hunting that I'd like to, and it is so much fun. It has been such a hoot to watch when they've had the chance to get lots of contact. They certainly weren't young dogs before, but oh my goodness, what a difference this year. I mean,
Well, you've got opportunities.
exactly.
It's no different than raising pups. If you don't have enough opportunities, they're not going to turn out.
But it's useful for all of us in that, and I've said this before, at any given time, very few of us have a puppy. It's nice to know that a middle-aged or even a slightly older dog that has a good foundation can still develop.
Well,
And
okay.
yes, they're still learning. They're still figuring things out.
Well, and I think the problem that most people have is their expectation is way too high, too fast.
Yep. This has been a great talk. This has been, and again, we're rolling around on some forest roads here up in northern Wisconsin, looking at cover. We tried to apply what we found. Well, and thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, no problem.
If people want to ask questions about some of what we've covered here, if they want to ask questions about what's happening going into the late season, where should they send them?
Go to mobilehuntingmaps.com, go to the contact form, and then send it in that way. Email it.
Right. And everybody, she did that without notes because she's driving here. And of course, we referenced this several times during this little drive, but remember Scout and Hunt maps, absolutely essential. We talk about looking at different kinds of cover. We talked about intersections of cover. We talked about where you're looking for 4 or 5 types of cover that come together or are close together. Scout and Hunt maps gives you that information, always there for you, whether you have cell reception or not, giving you the information that you need to be successful. And as we drive along here, everybody always remember to hunt the habitat. Thanks.